Howdy, folks. Mr. Reardon here. I'd like to walk you through a very important skill for AP English language and also for your future education, and that is how to build outlines for different kinds of essays. So, before you watch this presentation, you're going to need a few things. First, I'd like you to make sure you have the How to Build an Essay Outline closed notes sheet with you, so you can take notes on this presentation as it moves forward. If you don't have those notes, you can go directly to this link and print them out. You can also go through Schoology if you're one of my students and get them from there, print them out, and take the notes. If that's not a realistic possibility for you, then you can also just get a sheet of lined paper and take notes that way. Of course, you're going to need something to write with to take notes. And I'd also like you to have an argumentative essay that you've written recently or are still working on to practice creating essay outlines once the presentation has concluded. So, what is an outline? An outline, at its most fundamental, is an organized and highly abbreviated plan for your approach to an essay. And it uses a series of capital and lowercase letters that are indented in a particular way, indented in a consistent number of times throughout the outline, that allows you to decide on key features of your essay, often in advance of writing, though you can also do outlines after you've written something. So if you Google essay outline, you're going to see many conflicting results, many different kinds of outlines out there. And so you might wonder, especially after seeing the structure for the outline I'm going to show you, like what is the correct outline? What is the correct outline structure? And the reality is that the different authorities on writing, so MLA, APA, Harvard, Chicago, Associated Press, Turabian, like the different style guides have different ideas about what makes an outline good or not good or formatted correctly. And so I decided to just go with what Google Docs does by default in order to decide what our outline structure should be in this class. So if you try to build an outline in Google Docs following this structure, you'll see that the technology builds the pieces of the outline for you effectively. And the Google Docs default is actually really similar, but not quite identical, especially on the most granular levels to MLA's expectations. You also need to know there are many different kinds of outline, and so if you poke around the internet and see some different things, there might be conflicting information, and this is why. There are working outlines. Working outlines are going to be the most common kind here in this class, and those are outlines done before writing. Working outlines are great for timed essays, so like what you see in AP English Language and AP English Literature. They are also common, or they're also very helpful prior to the college equivalent of the AP exam, which of course is essay-based exams. You get a little blue book that's got 10 or 15 pages of blank paper, and you get a few prompts, and you respond for 3 hours. And that could be a final exam or a midterm exam in a college class. There are also draft outlines. Draft outlines are outlines that you create after writing a piece. These can help you to think about how you organized your paper and also help you think about how you might revise if you need to engage in revision. There are also formal outlines. Formal outlines tend to be a little more developed. Formal outlines involve a rigid format and also complete sentences. An instructor might ask you to construct a formal outline at Pali or in college for a substantial project or a substantial research paper. And those are often used as an intermediate step between like a working outline or between the early process of doing research and the actual writing of the essay. It's often really helpful for a teacher to see where your thinking is along the way, and the formal outline often completes or often checks that box. All right, so what do you need to know in order to build an outline? Or excuse me, why? I misread that. Why do you need to know how to build an outline? There are a number of reasons why I think it's important for you to know how to do this. Number one, it is the most valuable tool I can give you for managing the time constraints on the AP exam. The AP exam's timing, 3 essays in a little over 2 hours, is incredibly demanding. It might be one of the most demanding academic tasks in terms of time you are required to do in high school, for AP Lang, and maybe also for AP Lit if you take that. And so the outline, though, can really make the timing seem less daunting. Also, if you memorize the structure of the outline, not only will the timing be easier, but also the actually writing the essay, the process of putting all your thoughts together, becomes easier, because essentially you're separating out the act of thinking and the act of writing. And of course, you still have to think a little bit when you're writing, but you do a lot of the thinking in advance, and that makes things easier. Later in your education, you will be asked to write long papers. So the 10-page term paper at the end of the semester in a college class, a 50 or 75 or 100-page senior thesis in order to be awarded a bachelor's degree, a 100-plus page master's thesis, a 200 to 400-page book that constitutes a dissertation for a PhD, for a doctorate. All of those are the kinds of papers that that you might have to write later in your life. And this basic outline structure can be expanded. It's so modular, you can build it out in such a way that it can accommodate all of these different projects, regardless of their length. So knowing how to do this in miniature now will set you up for success on those bigger projects later. You also will know how to build a reverse outline of a paper you have already written, which is a great revision strategy for you. And also building reverse outlines, applying the structure to a paper somebody else has written, can be a good peer review strategy, because you can help someone to realize that maybe the way they organize their paper or the way you perceive their organization as a reader is different than what they intended. And last, building a reverse outline of a published work, such as an article or an assigned reading, can be a great way for you to evaluate your own understanding, and also, more importantly, to reinforce your understanding of the work. You could think of the reverse outline of a shorter article or an assigned reading as a way of taking notes on something that you have to take notes on, like you've been asked to read and you need notes for to turn them in, or for some kind of assessment. All right, so here is the outline structure with all that context behind us. The first thing you should do is just write the words essay outline next to that capital Roman numeral 1. Then we're indenting one level, so one tab. We have our capital A, and next to that, you want to put any information, of course, abbreviated, related to what you might want to do for your hook. Think about the way you want to approach your hook. Then for B, you want to think about anything you want to include for exigence, for the context of your argument overall, and for you want to include any pieces of YTAG, that means year, title, author, and genre, related to any texts mentioned in the prompt. If there are no texts mentioned in the prompt that you've been given for argument, of course, no need to include that. Texts are rarely mentioned in synthesis prompts, so of course you can ignore that in this part of the essay. But anything that you want to bring in to introduce your argument, that will go here. And then you want to write out the main claim of your thesis. At this point, you then want to bring in your subclaims. So we tabbed in again, and we're starting with a number. This number one, this is where you would write out your first subclaim, either an evidence-based subclaim, so what is your piece of evidence going to be, or you would write in the reason for your first reason for your argument. If you're doing evidence-based subclaims, you don't really necessarily need the next layer here, because your evidence will already have been stated. But if you're doing reason-based subclaims, you need it. So you state your reason, and then for evidence unit 1, you then will, state what the evidence is going to be, and then bring in any very specifics at this layer. Now, for a timed argument essay, this layer right here, the layer that says A parenthesis and then evidence unit 1, that might be where your specific evidence goes, or a little indication, an abbreviated indication of your specific evidence will go there, and you won't need this other layer because you're not quoting directly. So again, let's say we're doing a reason-based thesis. You state your reason here, or going back one layer, I argue this. The first reason is because of this. Here's my evidence, the evidence I'm going to use. Then you do, if you have a second evidence unit, this is where it goes. You would do a B, and then the evidence you're going to use for your second evidence unit. If it's a writing context where you're going to be bringing in specific quotes, you put them on this next layer. For timed essays, you don't really need that. For timed essays, I usually recommend one evidence unit only per paragraph. That goes for argument. Synthesis might be a little different because you will be bringing in counter arguments, or you might have a good reason to use 2 evidence units. But for argument, 1 evidence unit per paragraph is fine. At this point, we're going back a layer, so you would bring in your second reason for your subclaim, or if you're doing an evidence-based thesis, you state your evidence right there. If you want to get more specific, you can use the next layers, but it mostly looks like the layers above. Then we're all the way back to the capital letter, our second layer down, where I'm just going to write conclusion or conclusion approach. I would write that word for word, and then state the 2 things I want to do in my conclusion, and just plan that out in advance. You can always change it when you're actually writing if you decide that that is appropriate, but having a plan going in is helpful. All right, so that is the structure. At this point, I want to give you a sample. I want to show you a sample of what these outlines look like and what it actually feels like and sounds like to build one of these outlines. In order to do that, though, you need to be familiar with this prompt. This prompt showed up on the free response question of the 2022 AP English Language and Composition exam. This was question 3, the argument question. So pause the video, read this prompt, think for a minute about what you might say in response to this prompt if you opened your test booklet and you had seen this. All right, at this point, I'd like to walk you through a sample. So we're going to hop over here to Google Docs, zoom in a little bit. Oh. All right, so I'm going to do my capital I. I think I want to change this to Garamond just to make it the same as what my students are generally used to seeing. 16, make it nice and readable. And then I'll say capital I, and then just typing in essay outline. You see it does an automatic double Roman numerals, but I want to do tab in 1, and Google Docs does that automatically for me. The A is going to be my hook. For my hook for responding to that prompt, I think I would go with the idea from the Marvel comics, I'll say Marvel's Spider-Man. In the Spider-Man universe, I'll say the Spider-Man universe is widely recognized as the source of this quote: "With great power comes great responsibility." And that would be a quote that I could use to introduce my thoughts on the great responsibility, or the part of that great responsibility that is relevant, which of course is the making of decisions, making of big important decisions under pressure with limited information. So, and that connection that I just said is really what I would want to talk about here. So, like people in power or positions of authority in modern society often have to make difficult decisions under pressure and with limited information. If you wanted to write this in a more concise way, you are free to do that. I tend to be a pretty wordy writer. It's just my nature. So, but you are always, outlines are meant to be fast. They're meant to be fast thinking, so you can do higher quality writing. You can write less than I do if you want to. At this point, I would connect directly to Powell's quote, and I would probably copy the entire quote into my introduction, from the entire quote from the prompt. So then that's it. And I would also want my Y tag, which is, Colin Powell's 1995 autobiography. Autobiography counts here as the G in Y tag, the genre. All right. So then I want my main claim. My main claim is Powell's claim. It's important to make. It's not important to make quick decisions. It's actually much more important to make timely decisions, even if you have limited information. So I'm just going to say Powell's claim is correct. Period. And then my subclaims. My first one is, I think I would go with an evidence-based subclaims here. It just seems easier to me that way. I would want to talk about the U.S. government's response to 9/11. And then I would want to, in my outline, I don't want to write out all my reasoning, but I might talk about how, first of all, briefly, what happened. That might actually fall under the context piece, technically before evidence. At this point in the world, there could be plenty of people who are AP readers who were very young. I personally was 9. I think I was 9 when 9/11 happened. I was very young, so it's been long enough that a little context probably wouldn't hurt, given who your audience might be. And then, so briefly what happened, and then I would want to go into how there was pressure for the U.S. government to do something, even though so little information was available as to who was responsible and how one might secure justice. And yet, I'll say, like, the Bush administration responded anyway. I don't really know the specific details of everything the Bush administration did in order to respond, and there's no expectation that I remember all of that, because this is a timed essay, and because it's under testing conditions, and I can't consult any resources. So I would say something like this. I do happen to know that by October 2001, the USA, I'll say U.S. armed forces were on the ground in the Middle East, and by December 2001, were on the heels of Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, who was widely recognized as the one of the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks in the United States. Right. And so I might talk about how, like, Bush now had to make this difficult decision. He had to make a lot of difficult decisions, but, he couldn't wait forever. He couldn't wait to get all the information, because then the U.S., would seem vulnerable, would seem like it would not defend its borders, which could have very significant implications for international relations. So, all right. So that would be one. That's what I would talk about there. This is a timed essay. I definitely don't need 2 quote units. So I want to go back. I'm going to use the nice little demote button up here in Google Docs. There we go. Or promote, excuse me. Demote would be the other way. So my second piece of evidence here would be, I think I would want to talk about something more local. This is always a good idea in argument essays, to talk about something you know about. So something in your community that is relevant to the prompt. As long as you're not guilty of the hasty generalization fallacy, you're fine. So I'm going to say local governments' response to COVID-19. For this, I might talk about, like, the how, like, closing down too early. So that would be like December to February 2020 would have been mostly pointless, because there were so few cases in the US. And what is it? Closing down too late, or not at all, would have significant human life implications, right? Like high morbidity. Morbidity just means, like, illness and general human suffering, and then mortality, which is death. So, and I could even, like, bring in an additional layer of evidence here by talking about places that never shut down, or shut down minimally. This is almost like a Goldilocks thing here. Like, um, uh, there's a just right here. So I would be talking about that next. You'll notice there's like A, B, C here. I think I would actually want to uh, to to clean that up by making this, saying something here like, I don't know, by having A there, and then just deleting these, and just sort of making this more like a list. And I would talk about, how the just right closures in retrospect are like what Santa Clara County, California did, shutting down in March. The exact date was March 13th, when it was clear that the virus was spreading, even though we didn't have all the info. I could go into that and say, like, talk about how difficult it would have been to be in the position of the public health officers in Santa Clara County, having to weigh the significant economic consequences of shutting down versus the potential of people becoming ill, and making those very, very difficult decisions, and maybe concluding the paragraph with, how people who live in this region are ultimately should have been grateful for the heroic efforts of Dr. Sarah Cody and the other people involved. So that would be it for that paragraph. 1 quote unit, bringing in that evidence, talking about it, tying it back to the overall claim that Powell's Howell's argument about making timely decisions is correct. And then, so at this point, we're going back here. I'm using that promote button again and clicking on conclusion, or excuse me, typing conclusion. I'm just going to type the word, and then thing one, I would almost certainly restate thesis. I don't need to recopy it here because I can do that when I'm writing. And then I think I would want to tie to the would want to tie to this idea that today's youth are tomorrow's leaders, and it is so important that we as a whole society continue to talk about the importance of this idea of knowing how to make timely decisions. I could even bring in this idea of like learning from history. You don't really need an A there. I'm going to delete that. And like learning from history and applying the lessons to the many difficult issues to be seen in the future. That is gonna drive me bananas. It's quite unsatisfying. There we go. Okay. So that is it. That's what this outline might look like. Honestly, like I said, I put a lot of words in here. Your outlines could have significantly fewer words. Though the more thinking and the more writing you do on the outline, the more likely you are to be set up for success when it comes to writing your actual essay. And one more thing I'm going to say here while I have a chance. There are two quote units here, two body paragraphs here with one quote unit each for timed AP Lang argument essays. I think two one quote unit paragraphs is adequate, though if you have time for three, it is not a bad idea. Many of the highest scoring essays that the College Board releases have 3 body paragraphs and not 2. So with that, I'm going to go out here so you can see the whole thing. You can pause the video and take a look at the whole thing all at once if you want to. But then we're going to jump back here to the slides. I have just a couple more things to say. One of those things has to do with the Rhetorical Analysis FRQ, question 2 on the AP exam. You can actually use this structure for the rhetorical analysis question, but a few changes need to be made. I would still recommend starting with essay outline. A is still hook, but you may as well just use a quote hook for that and pull a quote from somewhere in the text. Not pulling from the first sentence of the text is probably a good idea, but you want to select a quote. If you want to just mark it in the passage and not copy it over, that's fine. B, instead of being exigence and context for your argument and Y tag related to the prompt, it is the context and exigence and other information related to the text you're analyzing, which is rhetorical situation, of course. So you need to write out medium, audience, exigence, speaker, subject, and also Y tag, year, title, author, and genre. I recommend you write those out vertically down the page, maybe on the right side of the page that you're outlining on, and just like note them all very quickly in a very succinct way so you can then weave them all together when you're writing your introduction to your essay. You then write out your entire thesis. So the writer uses X1 and X2 in order to Z1 and Z2. Of course, you have to have read and annotated and thought about the passage a little bit before you can do this. You need to identify your rhetorical choices and also accurately label purpose. If you don't label purpose accurately, I mean, God help you, right? You're not going to score well on the exam. So you have to slow down and think about that and make sure you get it right. You can do only one Z. It doesn't have to be 2 Zs, but my example here is X1 to Z1 and X2 to Z2. So for that first body paragraph, you want to make sure you clarify for yourself you're doing X1 to Z1. Mark the quote bounds on the passage itself in your exam booklet, and so you know what quote you're going to use. Then clarify for yourself what language you want to unpack for X analysis, what you might say about it, what your why piece is. Is it ethos, pathos, or logos? If it's pathos, specifically what emotion is the author's language trying to evoke, or what is the author trying to make you feel in that passage? And then how does the choice help you to achieve your rhetorical purpose? So you need to tie back to the Z piece effectively in that last bit. This is supposed to be X2 to Z2. I left my little 2 out in that little spot, which is very sad, but it's X2 to Z2. You just repeat those above pieces for your second quote unit. Again, 2 body paragraphs, 1 quote unit each. Then you do something very similar with the conclusion. You write conclusion, and then you plan the 2 things you want to do. Restating your thesis is a good idea, and then maybe tying the argument in the piece or the rhetorical situation of the piece to bigger ideas out in the world. So your next step here is going to be practicing. If you are my student, your assignment should be really clear to you. It should be in your notes packet, or it should be in Schoology. It's pretty likely that it's in both. It's probably in 5 places. So look for it. Make sure you complete the practice by its due date. Bring it to class, and because that's really going to help you when we do some timed writing in class, likely coming up soon. If you're not my student, you could always just go to the College Board website and pull up released argument questions and try out a few of these. If you do 3 or 4 of them and start setting yourself timers to time yourself, the more you do these, the better you're going to get at them, the more comfortable you feel with them, and then the timed writing is going to seem easier and easier. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much.